Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 22nd of March 2022 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now this particular article appears on page number 14. The article is titled as EPF rate cut is based upon the today's realities, says the finance minister. This article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection of Indian economy. Before discussing this particular article in much greater detail, let us first discuss the background. See, presently the government of India is implementing a social security scheme known as the Employee Provident Fund. The contribution to the Employee Provident Fund is made by both employee as well as the employer. As far as the rate of interest on the EPF contribution is concerned, it is initially proposed by the Employee Provident Fund organization and then finally approved by the Ministry of Finance. So initially the EPFO proposes the rate of interest that you would get on your contribution towards the EPF, and then it is approved by the Ministry of Finance. As far as the rate of interest on the EPF right now is concerned, it is approximately around 8.1%, and this has got declined to a 4-decade low, which means that the rate of interest that you get on your EPF contribution, this has got reduced to its lowest level in the last 40 years. In this regard, the opposition parties have criticized the government for this reduction in the rate of interest on the EPF contributions. In response, the Finance Minister of India has highlighted that the rate of interest on the EPF contributions may have got reduced in the recent past, but this rate of interest of 8.1%, this is still higher in comparison to the small savings schemes. For example, if you look at the rate of interest on the Sukanya Samriddhi account, this is approximately around 7.6%. Similarly, if you look at the average rate of interest that you would get on your bank deposits, this would be approximately around 5 to 5.5%. So, even though the rate of interest on the EPF contributions may have got reduced to its 4-decade low, the rate of interest is still higher in comparison to the other small savings schemes. How does this particular article become important as far as your prelims examination is concerned? As you can see in prelims 2021, we had a rated question related to the Employee Provident Fund and the casual workers. So, based upon the statement given by the finance minister, 3 things becomes important for the perspective of the prelims examination. First thing is the small saving schemes. Second one is the Employee Provident Fund. And the third one is Aatma Nirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. So based upon this particular statement given by the finance minister, we will focus upon these 3 aspects as far as your UPSC prelims examination is concerned. And based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt these 3 prelims questions for practice. So let's first understand the details about the small savings schemes in India, and then we will discuss about the Employee Provident Fund and Aatma Nirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. See, presently if the households wants to save money, the households can save money either in terms of bank deposits or in terms of the small savings schemes. These small savings schemes are run by the government of India directly. So presently we have approximately around 12 small savings schemes which are in turn categorized into 3 different categories. The first category is the postal deposits, that is the deposits that you keep in the post office. This can be either in terms of the time deposits or the demand deposits. Second category is the savings schemes, that is the National Savings Certificate and Kisan Vikas Patra. Then the third category is the social security schemes, which is in the form of Public Provident Fund, Senior Citizen Savings Scheme and Sukanya Samriddhi account. So whatever money the government gets through these small savings schemes, all that money the government puts it into a separate and dedicated fund known as a National Small Savings Fund. So this National Small Savings Fund in turn is part of the public account of India. So please do remember that the National Small Savings Fund, it is not part of Consolidated Fund of India. Rather, it is part of the public account of India. And whatever money the government mobilizes through these small savings schemes, all that money becomes part of the government liabilities under the public account of India. I hope you should be able to recall this in our economic survey discussion, wherein I discussed everything about the government's debt. So the money which the government gets in the form of small savings schemes, this becomes liability under the public account of India. Apart from that, I hope all of you must be knowing that whatever money the government borrows in a single year, that is referred to as a fiscal deficit. And in order to borrow money, the government may basically borrow money from the market. And to borrow money from the market, the government issues the government securities either in the form of treasury bills or the dated bonds. Apart from this particular aspect, that is the market borrowings, the government also borrows from the National Small Savings Fund. So what happens is, a certain amount of money which is lying in this National Small Savings Fund, it is in turn invested in the government securities, and that is referred to as securities against National Small Savings Fund. So a certain amount of money from the National Small Savings Fund is invested in the government securities. So in a way, the government here is borrowing money from the National Small Savings Fund in order to finance its fiscal deficit. So right now, the highest share of the fiscal deficit is from the market borrowings, and the second most important source for the government borrowing to finance its deficit is the securities against the National Small Savings Fund. Apart from that, what also used to happen earlier was certain amount of money from the National Small Savings Fund was given in the form of loans to certain PSUs such as the Food Corporation of India for the payment of food subsidy. And this we used to refer it to as the off-budget financing. Why off-budget financing? Now for example, let's say the government has to pay a food subsidy bill of rupees 100. Now to pay this food subsidy bill, the government has to pay this money from the Consolidated Fund of India, and moreover, the government may have to borrow money from the market in order to pay this food subsidy bill to Food Corporation of India. So in this particular case, that is, if the government is spending money directly from the Consolidated Fund of India, then obviously this would be shown in the budget as an expenditure. And secondly, if the government is required to borrow money from the market to give this 100 rupees in the form of food subsidy bill, automatically the fiscal deficit of the government would be higher. So in order to keep its fiscal deficit lower, what the government used to do earlier was, this 100 rupees, instead of giving it from the Consolidated Fund of India, it used to give it from the National Small Savings Fund, and that was referred to as the off-budget financing because it was not getting captured under the budget. And this was basically done in order to reduce or keep the fiscal deficit on the lower side. But in the last year's budget, the finance minister has categorically stated that henceforth, this particular practice of off-budget financing of the food subsidy bill would be stopped. That is, right now, whatever food subsidy bill has to be paid to the Food Corporation of India, this food subsidy bill is directly paid from the Consolidated Fund of India rather than from the National Small Savings Fund. So this is an important development which has taken place in the last year's union budget, and that is why it becomes quite important. So in case if you want to know more greater details about what exactly is off-budget financing and what are the recent announcements, please go through the previous year's budget video which has been uploaded on the YouTube. So here, as far as the National Small Savings Schemes is concerned, when it comes to the interest rate on the National Small Savings Schemes, this is fixed by the government on a quarterly basis. To be more specific, it is fixed by the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance. And this interest rate on the small savings schemes is in turn dependent upon the yield rates on the government securities of the similar maturity period. Now, for example, let's say the Ministry of Finance wants to fix a rate of interest on a 5 years time deposit with the post office. Now, the rate of interest on this particular 5 years time deposit, this would be approximately equal to the yield rates of a government security whose maturity period is equal to 5 years. Similarly, the rate of interest on a 3 years time deposit would be almost same as the yield rates of a government security of a maturity period of 3 years. So that is how the rate of interest on the small savings schemes is fixed. Let us now look into various details about the Employee Provident Fund. As I discussed before, the Employee Provident Fund, it is a social security scheme which is presently implemented by the Employee Provident Fund organization, which works under the Ministry of Labour. The Employee Provident Fund covers all the organizations that employ 20 or more employees. So in case of India, the organizations as such can be categorized into two types: the organizations that employ more than 20 people and the organizations that employ less than 20 people. So it does not cover the organizations that employ less than 20 people. It covers only those organizations which employ more than 20 people. Apart from that, in these organizations, that is in the organizations that employ more than 20 people, depending upon the monthly wages which the employees get, the employees can be categorized into two categories. That is the employees whose monthly wages is less than rupees 15,000 and the employees whose monthly wages is more than rupees 15,000. As far as the second category is concerned, that is the employees whose monthly wages is greater than 15,000, enrollment under the Employee Provident Fund is voluntary for such workers. But for the first category, that is for the category of workers whose monthly wages is less than 15,000, for them the enrollment under the Employee Provident Fund is mandatory. So please remember this from the perspective of the UPSC Prelims examination. Secondly, as you can see in this particular figure here, both employee as well as employer, they are required to make contribution towards the Employee Provident Fund. And this particular contribution, this is defined in terms of percentage. Percentage of what? It is defined as percentage of basic pay plus dearness allowance. Now just for the sake of example, let's say you have a particular employee A whose monthly wages is equal to rupees 10,000. So let's say his basic pay and dearness allowance is rupees 10,000. So 12% of his monthly wages, that is 10,000 rupees, which would come down to say 1,200 rupees, that amount he would make a contribution towards the Employee Provident Fund. As far as the employer is concerned, employer would also make a contribution of 12%. So as you can see here, 8.33% of the contribution would go towards employee pension scheme. So here the employer would make a contribution of approximately around rupees 833 towards the employee pension scheme, and 3.67% of rupees 10,000, that is approximately around rupees 367 towards the Employee Provident Fund. So once again, as you can see here, the contribution which is made by the employer is same as the contribution which is made by the employee. But the only difference is this contribution made by the employer is split between the employee pension scheme and the Employee Provident Fund. So the entire contribution made by the employee is going towards the Employee Provident Fund, whereas as far as the contribution of the employer is concerned, 8.33% of the contribution goes towards the employee pension scheme, and the remaining 3.67% of the contribution goes towards the Employee Provident Fund. Now coming to details about the Aatma Nirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. I hope all of you must be knowing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the employment situation. First and foremost, because of the COVID, a large number of people have lost their jobs. And these people who have lost their jobs, the organizations as such are reluctant to rehire or re-employ these workers. The reason is, if the organizations rehire or re-employ these workers who have lost their jobs, then the organizations as such would be required to make a contribution towards the employee provident fund and the employee pension scheme. That is, they'll have to make 12% of the contribution if they rehire or re-employ these people who have lost their jobs. So that's the first problem. Second is, if the organizations hire new workers, for these new workers, the organizations would be required to make a contribution of 12% towards the EPF as well as employee pension scheme. So there are basically two challenges before us. First challenge is, for those people who have lost their jobs, the organizations are reluctant to rehire them. And second, the organizations are also reluctant to create new employment opportunities because of their higher financial burden. So in order to solve these two problems, what we have is the Aatma Nirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. The basic rationale behind this particular program is to reduce the financial burden on the employers and to encourage them to hire more workers. That is, to encourage them to rehire or re-employ the workers who have lost the jobs, and to also encourage them to hire new workers. So under this particular Yojana, for the organizations which employ up to 1,000 employees, for these organizations, both the employer contribution as well as the employees contribution would be paid by the government. That is, for the organizations which employ up to 1,000 employees, the government would make the entire 24% contribution by both employee as well as employer. Whereas in the organizations that hire or employ more than 1,000 people, in such organizations, the government will make the contribution of only the employee and not the employer. And this particular contribution by the government will be made available for a period of 2 years. And it is applicable only for the new workers who joined between 1st of October 2020 to 30th of June 2021, and the workers who have lost jobs between 1st of March 2020 and 30th of September 2020, and these workers get rehired or re-employed. As far as the prelims examination is concerned, do not remember these dates. UPSC would not ask you about these dates, but what is important is that the government benefit will be available for 2 years, and for the organizations which employ up to 1,000 people, the government will make the contribution of both employee as well as employer, whereas in the organizations which employ more than 1,000 people, the government will make a contribution of only the employee and not the employer. So based upon the understanding of these topics, please try to attempt these 3 prelims questions for practice and let us know the answer in the comment section given below. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as Arms Dependency on Russia. This article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, and accordingly this article discusses about the present status of the international trade in the defense goods. The article here is based upon the report published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. See, as far as this particular article is concerned, this article becomes important both from the perspective of prelims as far as the mains examination. From the perspective of the prelims, one should be aware about the present status of India's external trade in defense goods and various initiatives taken in order to ensure Atmanirbhar Bharat in the defense manufacturing. As far as the mains examination is concerned, one should be aware about various aspects such as initiatives, challenges and strategies needed in order to boost the defense manufacturing in India. As far as the mains related aspect is concerned, I have already discussed all of these aspects in the DNS dated 22nd of Jan 2021. So as you can see in this particular DNS, I have discussed various aspects such as what all initiatives the government has taken to boost the defense manufacturing. So I discussed the concepts of the defense offset policy, defense procurement procedure. I had also discussed various constraints and challenges and what should be done going ahead. So in case any of you have not gone through this particular DNS, I suggest you to go through this particular DNS in order to understand all the aspects related to the self-reliance and defense manufacturing. So since the mains related aspects I have already discussed in the previous DNS, my focus in this particular DNS will be on the prelims related aspects. So once I discuss the prelims related aspects from the perspective of this particular article, I'll also discuss these 4 prelims questions for practice. So let us have a look at the present status of defense manufacturing in India. As on 2019-20, the total turnover of defense manufacturing in case of India was around rupees 80,000 crores. Out of this 80,000 crores, 80% was contributed by the defense PSUs and the remaining 20% was contributed by the private sector entities. So as you can see, a major chunk of defense manufacturing in case of India is basically contributed by the defense PSUs. Further, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, India is the second largest importer of defense goods after Saudi Arabia. Almost around 65 to 70% of the defense goods are basically imported. As far as the exports of defense goods from India is concerned, one of the most encouraging or a good news for India is that the overall export of defense goods from India has increased in the last 5 years. So in the last 5 years, it has increased from rupees 1,500 crores to almost around rupees 8,500 crores. And according to Stockholm International Peace Research Institutes, some of the defense PSUs such as the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, Ordnance Factory Board and the Bharat Electronics Limited, they are considered to be among the top 100 defense companies at a global level. Further, if you look at the highlights of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute Yearbook 2021, the largest arms importers at the global level are Saudi Arabia, followed by India and Egypt. The largest arms exporters are USA, followed by Russia and France. And the countries with the highest defense expenditure are USA, followed by China and India. So as you can see, India, in terms of the defense expenditure, it is presently placed at third place at the global level. And look at the defense expenditure of India and compare that with China. So China's defense expenditure on an annual level, it is approximately around $250 billion, whereas for India, it is around $70 billion. So as you all know, India is a major importer of defense goods. Hence, in order to ensure Aatma Bharat in the defense manufacturing, we have unveiled the Defense Production and Export Promotion Policy 2020. The overall objective of this particular policy is to achieve a turnover of 1.75 lakh crore in the defense manufacturing by the end of 2025. So the present turnover of defense manufacturing is 80,000 crores and the idea is to enhance this turnover value to at least around rupees 1.75 lakh crore. Apart from that, this particular policy also seeks to export defense goods worth $5 billion by the end of 2025. So this is the present status of the defense manufacturing in India. Now this particular article basically highlights that since 1991, the overall defense imports into India was steadily increasing. However, in these 5 years, that is between 2017 to 2021, the overall import of defense goods into India has reduced. So, on one hand, the export of defense goods from India has increased, whereas the overall import of defense goods into India has got reduced. Now, this is an encouraging news as far as the defense manufacturing in case of India is concerned. Secondly, this particular graph here shows as to from which all countries does India import the arms. And as you can see, since the year 2000, it has been Russia which has been the largest exporter of arms to India. But in the year 2021, Russia has been overtaken by France. So between the years 2000 to 2021, almost all the years except 2021, Russia has been the top supplier of arms to India. Whereas in 2021, Russia has been overtaken by France. In spite of this, even today, Russia accounts for almost around 46% of the defense imports into India. So this clearly shows that the dependency on Russia is quite higher as far as the import of defense goods into India is concerned. So as far as the import of defense goods into India is concerned, the first ranking country is France, followed by Russia. At third place, you have USA. At fourth place, Israel. And at fifth place, UK. Let us now take up these 4 prelims questions for practice. Now coming to the first prelims question for practice, the question here is, With respect to the Modernization Fund for Defense and Internal Security, consider the following statements. The first statement is, the setting up of the Modernization Fund for Defense and Internal Security has been recommended by the 15th Finance Commission. The second statement is, the fund would be funded through the disinvestment of the defense PSUs and the monetization of defense lands. So let's understand about the Modernization Fund for Defense and Internal Security. See, presently, whatever money the government is spending on defense, that is the defense expenditure, it can be categorized into the revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure is the money which the government spends on payment of salaries and pensions of the defense officials. Whereas the capital expenditure is the money which the government spends on buying new defense goods. Presently, a major chunk of defense expenditure is spent on the revenue expenditure, which leaves out less amount of money to be spent for the capital expenditure. And if you don't spend money for the capital expenditure in defense, then obviously we would not be able to undertake the modernization of our defense forces. Accordingly, the 15th Finance Commission has recommended the government to set up a separate and dedicated fund known as the Modernization Fund for the Defense and Internal Security. This particular fund should be exclusively used only for undertaking the capital expenditure in the defense, that is for buying new defense goods, new defense weapons. And the 15th Finance Commission has recommended that this particular fund should be funded by undertaking the disinvestment of the defense PSUs and by undertaking the monetization of defense lands. Monetization of defense land basically means that the Ministry of Defense should identify the vacant land or the unutilized land which it has got control over, and such land can be monetized in order to raise money for undertaking the defense modernization. So as you can see, both the statements which are given here are correct. Now let's look at the second practice question. The question is, with respect to the present status of the international defense trade, consider the following statements. India is the largest importer of defense goods. As we discussed, India is the second largest importer. Second one is, Russia is the largest exporter of defense goods. No, it is actually the USA. The third statement is, import of defense goods into India have reduced in the last 5 years. As we discussed, the statement is right. Accordingly, the right answer would be C. Now coming to the third practice question. The question is, with respect to the National Defense Fund, consider the following statements. The statement is, the National Defense Fund is funded through the voluntary donations from the people. Second statement is, this fund is exclusively used for the defense capital expenditure. Please try to find out about the National Defense Fund on your own and let us know the answer in the comment section given below. Now coming to last practice question. The question is, with respect to Defense Production and Export Promotion Policy 2020, consider the following statements. The first statement is, the policy seeks to achieve a defense turnover of $25 billion for the end of 2025, which as we discussed is correct. The second statement is, the policy seeks to privatize all the defense PSUs to encourage the domestic production. I hope all of you must have studied or heard about the Strategic Public Sector Enterprise Policy. Under the Strategic Public Sector Enterprise Policy, defense has been categorized as a strategic sector. Since it has been categorized as strategic sector, it would mean that in future, we would have at least around 4 to 5 defense PSUs, which would be involved in the production of defense goods. The remaining defense PSUs would either be privatized or they would be merged into the larger defense PSUs. So in future, we are not going to privatize all the defense PSUs. Rather, in future, since defense is a strategic sector, we will have at least around 4 to 5 defense PSUs. Accordingly, the second statement which is given here is wrong, and the right answer should be A, that is 1 only. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on the editorial page number 6. The article is highlighted as Realizing the Potential of Maitri and Mateship. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, International Relations. This article has been written by the Australian High Commissioner to India. See, yesterday, that is March 21st, 2022, the second virtual summit of India and Australia was held. This virtual summit was attended by the Indian Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi and the Australian Prime Minister Mr. Scott Morrison. Prior to this, the first virtual summit was held in June 2020, and it was in this particular summit that the bilateral relationship between India and Australia was elevated to the status of a comprehensive and strategic partnership. So naturally, a lot was expected as far as India-Australia second virtual summit was concerned. So let us look into the major highlights or the major announcements as far as the second virtual summit is concerned. First and foremost, in this particular summit, it has been decided that henceforth, that is from now onwards, every year, the annual summit of leaders of both the countries would be held. And this particular summit, that is the annual summit, would be held as part of the comprehensive and strategic partnership. So this is one of the major outcomes of the second virtual summit. Secondly, so in case of India, we have set up an agency known as KABIL, which stands for Khanij Videsh India Limited. The basic mandate of KABIL is to undertake the exploration and mining of certain strategic and critical minerals in order to ensure India's mineral security. In the second virtual summit, a memorandum of understanding has been signed between KABIL and the Australian government. This particular memorandum of understanding will enable KABIL to undertake the exploration and mining of strategic and critical minerals in Australia. Apart from that, this particular memorandum of understanding will enable KABIL to gain Australia's expertise in mining of strategic and critical minerals. Nextly, see, the Indian government has been focusing a lot on creation of infrastructure. Already we have taken a number of initiatives such as the National Infrastructure Pipeline, the National Monetization Pipeline, and so on. Hence, in order to attract more investment from Australia, both the leaders have reiterated the need for increased cooperation between the National Infrastructure Investment Fund and the Australian Pension and Sovereign Fund known as the Future Fund. One important announcement which was made in this particular summit was that whatever tax benefits, whatever tax incentives the Australian pension and sovereign funds get in Australia, the same tax benefits and incentives will be made available to them even in India as well. So this is one major announcement in the second virtual summit, and this will encourage more of investment from Australia into India. Nextly, I hope all of you must be knowing that presently India and Australia are negotiating the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. So both the leaders in this particular summit have reiterated the need to fast track and complete the negotiation of the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement at the earliest. Nextly, the General Rawat India-Australia Young Defence Officers Exchange Program has been finalized between India and Australia. And lastly, in order to promote greater cooperation between India and Australia in the Indo-Pacific region, both the countries have decided to increase the financial assistance to the Pacific Island countries, and this financial assistance will be provided both through International Solar Alliance as well as the Coalition for the Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Apart from that, as far as your UPSC mains examination is concerned, whenever you have to study about bilateral relationship of India with other countries, one should predominantly focus on different aspects. Particularly, one should focus upon the convergences, divergences, and what should be done in order to improve the relationship with India with a particular country. So keeping in mind India's relationship with Australia, we must focus upon what are the convergences between India and Australia, particularly in terms of economic cooperation, defense cooperation, energy cooperation, and so on. What are the major points of divergences and what should be done going ahead in order to strengthen India-Australia relationship. So let us focus upon these aspects from the perspective of the UPSC mains examination. So we will discuss all the areas of convergences in terms of economic, energy, maritime, defense, and people to people contact, then certain areas of divergences and what should be done going ahead. With respect to the areas of convergences, let us first discuss the first area of convergence, that is the economic cooperation. See, in the year 2020-21, Australia was the 12th largest trading partner for India. The total volume of bilateral trade between India and Australia was around $25 billion. Apart from that, Australia has a huge potential to emerge as a major source of investments into India. In the year 2020-21, the overall investments by Australia into India was around $15 billion. So there is a huge potential to increase this investment, particularly into the financing of infrastructure in the Indian economy. Accordingly, both these two countries are now finalizing a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. Apart from that, both the two countries have signed and ratified the double taxation avoidance agreement. Further, as discussed before, we have decided to extend the tax benefits to the Australian pension and sovereign funds. So whatever tax benefits, tax incentives the Australian pension and sovereign funds get in Australia, the same tax benefits they will be able to avail even in India as well. Nextly, so in case of India, we have launched a payment interface known as the Unified Payment Interface. Similarly, Australia has launched its own payment interface known as the New Payment Platform. Now we are trying to explore the possibility of integrating India's Unified Payment Interface with Australia's New Payment Platform. Nextly, we are also exploring the possibility of launching the RuPay card in Australia. This is for the benefit of the Indian diaspora who are living in Australia presently. The next area of convergence is the energy cooperation. I hope all of you must be knowing that India is majorly an import dependent country, particularly with respect to energy. So one of the biggest challenges before the Indian economy is the energy insecurity, and that is where Australia comes into picture. This is so because Australia is considered to be a rich source of energy such as coal, uranium as well as natural gas. So Australia can be an answer for India's energy security problem. Accordingly, both these two countries have stepped up their cooperation in the field of energy as well. For example, we have signed the India-Australia Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. Then, as highlighted before, recently a Memorandum of Understanding has been signed between Kabul and Australia. And lastly, Australia has supported India's membership in the Nuclear Suppliers Group in spite of the fact that India is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The next area of convergence is the maritime cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. See, when it comes to Indo-Pacific region, both India and Australia share the same concerns. These concerns include the growing threat of China, particularly its expansionism in the Indo-Pacific region, growing maritime piracy, terrorism, the problem of climate change, the growing problem of natural disasters in the Indo-Pacific region, and so on. Accordingly, in order to address these threats, both India and Australia have taken a common stand, and both these two countries stand for a free, open, inclusive, and rules-based Indo-Pacific region. That is why both India and Australia are part of the Quad grouping. Apart from that, Australia is an active participant of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, which has been started by India. When it comes to the defense cooperation, both these two countries share the similar concerns, that is the rising expansionism of China, both in terms of territorial claims as well as the maritime claims. Accordingly, in order to strengthen their defense cooperation, they have signed a number of agreements. For example, they have signed the Mutual Logistics Service Agreement, which in turn facilitates the reciprocal access to each other's military logistic facilities. Nextly, we conduct regular maritime exercises known as AU'S Index, and in the year 2020, Australia participated in the Malabar Naval Exercise. The discussion of India-Australia bilateral relationship would be incomplete without the discussion of the people-to-people contact between the two countries. See, presently there is a strong presence of Indian diaspora in Australia, where India is considered to be the second largest source of international students in Australia. In order to further strengthen the people-to-people contact, both these two countries are presently trying to put in place the Migration and Mobility Partnership Arrangement. The basic purpose of such an arrangement is twofold. One, to encourage more Indian students into Australia, and second, to prevent illegal human trafficking into Australia. In spite of these areas of convergences, there are certain areas of divergences between India and Australia. What are these areas of divergences? First and foremost, Australia is heavily dependent on China, particularly with respect to bilateral trade as well as investment. So even though Australia is part of the Quad grouping, and even though Australia regularly cooperates with countries such as USA, Australia's ability to take anti-China stand is quite lower because of its higher dependence on China, both in terms of bilateral trade as well as investment. Nextly, see, as I discussed before, presently India and Australia are negotiating the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, but there has been large-scale delays with respect to finalization of this free trade agreement because of differences on certain fundamental issues. So unless this Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement gets finalized as early as possible, the economic cooperation between these two countries would not get strengthened. So going forward, India and Australia needs to focus on some important aspects. For example, we need to finalize the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement at the earliest. Secondly, India, Australia and Japan have launched a trilateral initiative known as the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. The basic focus of such an initiative is to create their own supply chains which is independent of China. So going forward, these three countries should focus upon the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative to create their own supply chains and to boost their overall economic growth. Nextly, both India and Australia should come together and try to achieve consensus on the shared vision on Afghanistan, particularly after the takeover of Taliban. And lastly, India and Australia need to keep a much higher focus on the Indo-Pacific region through various multilateral groupings such as Quad and contain the rising China. Both India and Australia should stand for free, open and rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific region. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know as far as this particular article is concerned. The next article appears on page number 11. See, whenever the finance minister presents the budget, along with the budget related documents, the finance minister introduces the appropriation bill and the finance bill. Both the appropriation bill and the finance bill, they are considered to be the money bill. And since they are money bill, the Rajya Sabha has limited powers with respect to the passage of the appropriation bill and the finance bill. Now this particular article here highlights that recently the Rajya Sabha has returned back the appropriation bill to the Lok Sabha. Hence, as far as the UPSC Prelims examination is concerned, one should be aware as to what exactly is a money bill and how a money bill is different from the ordinary bill. Now this becomes quite important because as you can see in Prelims 2018, there was a direct question related to what exactly is a money bill. So let us understand various differences between the ordinary bill and the money bill. So when you look at the money bill, the definition of the money bill has been given under Article 1110 of the Indian Constitution. According to the Article 1110, money bill is a bill which contains provisions which exclusively, that is, which deals only with various aspects that include imposition, abolition, remission, alteration or regulation of tax, a bill which regulates borrowing by the union government, a bill which deals with custody, payment and withdrawal of money from the Consolidated Fund of India or the Contingency Fund of India, appropriation of money out of the Consolidated Fund of India. So here appropriation means that the government is taking prior approval from the Parliament to withdraw money from the Consolidated Fund of India. And lastly, if any bill is seeking to declare any expenditure to be chargeable on the Consolidated Fund of India. So a bill which exclusively deals with any of these provisions is declared to be a money bill. Whereas an ordinary bill can deal with any matter related to general legislation. The ordinary bill does not require the prior recommendation of the President. but a money bill requires a prior recommendation of the President for its introduction in the Lok Sabha. The ordinary bill can be introduced either in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, but the money bill has to be introduced only in the Lok Sabha. So a money bill cannot be introduced in the Rajya Sabha. Nextly, the ordinary bill, it can either be introduced by a minister. In that case, it will be called as public bill or a government bill, or it can be introduced by a private member, and in that case, it is considered to be a private member's bill. But a money bill, it has to be introduced only by a minister, and it cannot be introduced by a private member. So once a money bill is introduced in the Lok Sabha and once it is passed by the Lok Sabha, before transmitting the money bill to the Rajya Sabha, the Speaker of the Lok Sabha then certifies this particular money bill to be a money bill. So a money bill requires a certification from the Lok Sabha Speaker before it is transmitted to the Rajya Sabha. Whereas if an ordinary bill is introduced in the Lok Sabha and if it is passed by the Lok Sabha, it does not require certification of the Speaker before sending the bill to the Rajya Sabha. In case of ordinary bill, once it is passed to the Rajya Sabha can either amend the ordinary bill or it can even reject the ordinary bill. But in case of the money bill, the Rajya Sabha cannot amend or reject the money bill. The Rajya Sabha can only make recommendations. Further, even when the Rajya Sabha makes recommendations, it is up to the Lok Sabha whether to accept or reject these recommendations. Apart from that, once an ordinary bill is passed by the Lok Sabha and if it is sent to the Rajya Sabha is required to return the bill within the next 6 months. And if it fails to return the bill within the next 6 months, there is a provision of a joint sitting. So once a bill is passed by the Lok Sabha and if it is sent to the Rajya Sabha, and if the Rajya Sabha makes certain amendments to the ordinary bill which are not acceptable to the Lok Sabha, if the Rajya Sabha rejects the ordinary bill, or if the Rajya Sabha does not return the bill within the next 6 months, then there is a provision for the joint sitting that happens in case of the ordinary bill. But in case of money bill, the Rajya Sabha is required to return the bill within the 14 days. And there is no provision for the joint sitting in case of the money bill. So that's the most important difference between the ordinary bill and the money bill. And lastly, when the ordinary bill is sent to the President for his assent, the President has multiple options, such as the President can reject, approve or return the bill for the consideration. In case of money bill, the President can either reject or approve the money bill, but the President cannot return the money bill. Usually what happens is, since the money bill is introduced with a prior recommendation of the President normally approves the money bill. So these are some important differences that you should know between the ordinary bill and the money bill. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Let us now have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option B. As far as the question for the day is concerned, the question is, with respect to National Defence Fund, consider the following statements. The first statement is, the National Defence Fund is funded through the voluntary donations from the people. And the second statement is, the fund is exclusively used for the defence capital expenditure.